as we speak bold, ain't tripping on the haters. It could take freedom from a cold dead hands. We're locked and loaded for the last dance. 'Cause we're the new American gangsters, ready to die for this land.
Hello, everybody, and welcome.
Hola.
This is Shelby Bush and attorney Brian Blim. And I think we got a good show for you today. We're going to talk about the No Kings protest, and we're also going to dive a little bit into the Albert censors. Dr. Dougherty had brought that up when we met with him in last week's podcast. And we decided to do a little more digging and see what we can find out. And the connections in the Albert system or the Albert censor is a little bit disturbing. So we're going to talk about that today and break down, once again, an additional way that these third-party NGOs are inserting themselves into our elections.
Well, I want to sort of change the language there on that last statement you made, not to contradict you or anything. They're not inserting themselves into our election. They are being inserted by federal government, national security agencies, and by state and local Democrat agencies and entities like Adrian Fontes.
Mm-hmm.
Because well, what do NGOs do? Non-governmental organizations. What can they do that the government can't?
Well, they can do quite a bit, including conceal their activities from the American people, and that's the biggest advantage
Right.
to these elections departments utilizing that. We've had that problem
With
at the
Runback.
county, the
Mhm.
state level, all the way to the
Right.
federal level.
Right. And so, government will typically rely on NGOs because NGOs, as they're not government, so they can do things the government would be prohibited by law from doing,
Like violate your privacy,
which is scary as hell.
evade public records or inspection.
Right. Provide maybe information on the status of an election. Who knows?
Sell and
Yeah.
exchange information that our government can't.
Right. Interesting. Yeah.
So, it's going to be an interesting conversation, but
Mhm.
let's start with this last Saturday. There was a nationwide protest called No Kings.
Right.
And
Well,
go ahead.
I just I want to thank all of these protesters from the bottom of my heart because we woke up the next morning and we still didn't have a king. I mean, that's a good thing, right?
Well, don't you find it a little ironic, Brian, that they're out protesting
Right.
No Kings in America,
Right.
which is technically anti-Trump is what they're claiming,
Right.
while simultaneously President Trump
Mhm.
is holding a 250-year anniversary of the military in which he's featuring
Right.
the colonial officers
Uh-huh.
that actually liberated this nation
Uh-huh.
from the British rule
Right.
of the British king.
Right.
So, maybe in some ways they were protesting with President Trump.
Could be. This whole thing was a scam from the get-go, and this is actually something that was planned long ago, right? I mean, I found information that says the U.S. Army, right? Its 250th birthday,
Mm-hmm.
that it asked if it could have a parade to celebrate its 250th birthday. And the Biden administration approved that request. It's my understanding. And so they've known this was going to happen the whole time. They try to spin it as, Trump's throwing himself a big birthday party because he wants to be a king. And only dictators have military parades, right? It's all part of this huge scam to destabilize the United States of America.
Well, and I think one of the narratives too was that he's spending millions of dollars on this
Right.
parade while simultaneously talking about government waste and
Yeah.
firing
Yeah.
employees. But
Mhm.
I thought I heard somewhere that this was all sponsored by private industry,
Uh-huh.
and that it actually didn't cost the taxpayers to host this parade.
Yeah, large corporations like I think Lockheed Martin, Marietta,
Hmm.
whatever it's called, I believe they were one of the primary contributors. So you have a lot of these military defense contractors and other companies and corporations that pulled their resources and paid for, is my understanding, the lion's share, if not all, of this parade. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
So, because of the LA riots
Mhm.
and what was happening in LA, in order to push this No Kings through to the average protester, which is
Right.
what the affluent liberal white individual, from what I could tell.
Yeah, pretty much. I was in town because, wife and I got a new puppy and they're training him up to be my out in the wild pup. And so been in town training him. And so he and I drove around on Saturday and we went to 4 of these No Kings rallies. And actually 3 of them we went twice, right? And so we went in the morning and we just continually did this cycle. And I got to tell you, we were down at Southern and Dobson, right? That's my absolutely favorite grocery store in the Phoenix area when I'm in town is El Super, right? You get just the huge selection of chilies, and other Mexican food related vegetables, right? And so it's an excellent place to go shop. But they had one of their rallies down there at the intersection, and I was seeing social media posts that were saying thousands of people, and I weren't seeing that. First of all, when I went there in the morning, it was like they were cleaning out sort of the old folks' homes and giving them some sun for the morning, because a lot of old liberal white people.
Well,
Right.
we saw the same thing. So,
Mhm.
Steve and I decided to go out and catch some of the sights on the
Right.
West Valley.
Right.
And so we went to 35th Avenue in Peoria, and I think there was maybe 15 people
Uh-huh.
there on the corners. Again, all liberal white. Then
Mhm.
we drove down Bell Road, and there was 3 locations along Bell Road.
Right.
2 of the sites, there was nobody there at all.
Mhm.
So I don't know if a couple people showed up
Mhm.
and then they thought it wasn't worthwhile. And then there was one on, I believe it was 99th Avenue in Bell,
Mhm.
where there was maybe 25 people
Right.
lining the road. And again, it wasn't the same
Mhm.
kind of atmosphere that
Right.
you would expect or what you're seeing in LA. I
Right.
mean, it was all older,
Uh-huh.
white.
Mhm.
I didn't see a lot of minority, but it was peaceful.
Yeah.
And they have the right to do this. They
Of course,
absolutely have the
absolutely
right.
100%.
And I will
Yeah.
defend their right to
Uh-huh.
say what they want to say, the same as we'll
Right.
defend ours, right? It's free
Well,
speech.
I mean, we'll defend their right, but they won't defend ours. And that's what the most significant issue is, right? And so
Absolutely.
you have these people, the biggest hypocrites on the planet Earth, right? They call this the No Kings Rally. It's largely supplied by or funded by, it's my understanding, and then there are different funding for different protests because I think
Mhm.
LA is different. But much of this protest was the Walmart era, right?
Right.
Her family made billions of dollars selling y'all cheap Chinese made crap, right? And so you've got all of that money that was helping to fund it, but a lot of it was coming from, it's my understanding, a Chinese guy who's living in Shanghai who is part of the Communist Party, and he is supporting basically the destabilization of the United States of America, in large part through these protests. Fortunately, I want to thank all of the protesters I saw and most throughout the nation, because I haven't heard of many instances of violence.
Right.
Um,
Not in Arizona.
right.
There was some stuff going on, I think, in
Mhm.
Chicago and
Yeah.
some of the places back east, but not in Arizona, which is good. But I think in order to get these people to participate in light of the riots, they had to paint this narrative.
Right.
And I was listening to a video that was a training for the No Kings organizers
Right.
put on by the ACLU.
Uh-huh.
And their immigrant, the immigrant rights director at the national level is speaking in this video. And they paint this narrative that LA is all Trump's fault. It wouldn't have happened had Trump not have gone, that everything was peaceful. So I want to kind of play that video so people can hear what they're saying,
Mhm.
and then we can talk about what the reality truly is.
Right.
Steve, can you go ahead and cue up number one, peaceful until the National Guard?
Now, the administration says that this deployment is about safety. We know that it's not. We know that Los Angeles officials and even the LAPD confirmed that the protests were peaceful before the troops arrived.
So this is on the 6th. So this is a few days before the troops arrived. And I don't know about you, Brian. Does this look peaceful to you? Is this okay? You're an attorney. Would you deem this as a peaceful demonstration?
Well, we know that, if you're a large corporation like Waymo's a company that does self-driving cars,
Right.
right? They have pulled out of Los Angeles. Did you know that?
Well, because they were burning their cars.
Because they were burning Waymo cars.
And then the LA, the police chief said everything's under control, but you can see in that video that the sheriff's department drove right through this intersection, that they're throwing debris and garbage and trash.
He didn't even want to stop.
No, he didn't even stop. And then
Right.
just down the road from that, you can see it looks like and this is not National Guard. This is the LAPD in their riot gear. They're exchanging gas canisters back
Right.
and forth across the road here.
Right. And you actually had, though, you have a lot of violence. And I guess a lot of people want to try to shape the narrative by saying, oh, nobody got hurt, right? To excuse away any violence that was actually taking place, as a way to say it's not that bad. But you had the U.S. federal building under assault in downtown Los Angeles, right? As these ICE agents are trying to do their job, which is the enforcement of Arizona or U.S. law, right? And so when you get these groups of protesters physically attacking a federal building, I mean, that's a violent encounter. When people have to hide behind shields, when people have to hide, behind their riot gear, if these people were peacefully protesting, there would be absolutely no need for riot gear. And so, that demonstrates that these people were a threat and they were attacking law enforcement in an effort to prevent them from doing their job.
Well, absolutely. And again, all of this footage that we just played for you,
Mm-hmm.
it all occurred prior to the National Guard hitting the ground in
Right.
LA. So when you have the ACLU, which considers itself a reputable organization,
Uh-huh.
lying to 17,000 people on
Right.
that Zoom call, telling them that it was a peaceful protest
Uh-huh.
and that Trump is the one that initiated violence by inserting the National Guard. How is it that people don't see the truth with their own eyes?
Well, I think a lot of people see the truth, but they don't really care about the truth because they have been so ingrained that Trump is a Nazi, that Trump is a fascist, that Trump is a dictator. And these are people who, probably received every vaccine and every booster, right?
Right.
as dictated by their government. And so you got a whole host of people that still refuse to believe that Joe Biden is mentally incompetent, right? And you have people who literally this is the problem with the No Kings Rally is all of these people supported the largest medical experimentation on human beings since Nazi Germany. They supported that, right? They wanted to put you in a concentration camp if you didn't get vaccinated.
Right.
They wanted you in jail if you refused to wear a mask in public, even though there was absolutely no science supporting the efficacy of masks to stop COVID, to stop the spread of COVID, right? And so, these people are dictated, and they're used to being dictated to, and that's part of the problem. Is
Right.
that they're used to simply accepting what their, I guess,
The Fed reality,
the Fed
whatever's fed
reality,
to 'em.
this Fed
Yeah.
narrative, right? And it reminds me a lot of, God, we could probably talk for hours on this subject, right? What was the difference between Europeans and American colonials after, what was the difference? Why did we tell King George to go shove it?
Right.
Right?
Well, it was free thought, free thinking, the desire to be liberated.
Right.
Right. It makes you break away from the fray and start looking at things and asking questions. It's
Right.
the old patriot mantra used to
Uh-huh.
be always question authority,
Always question authority.
because that's what's going to bring you
Mhm.
liberation and freedom,
Right.
right? The questioning of authority, but they don't know
Right.
how to do that.
And so the colonists came over from Europe, right? And they had, for a long period of time, been given free reign, right? Until the English decided to clamp down. And so this, I call myself a classical liberal, right? And what I mean by that is classical in the American sense. I'm a liberal, very much like the founding fathers, who supported significant restrictions on government in our federal system, and pushing government down to the lowest level possible. And so they did this mental, I guess, state developed that was completely different from the European mental state, right? The Europeans have, and even still to this day, government is their king, right? Government is their nanny. When government says jump, Europeans typically jump. And Americans had sort of divided from that and focused more on the individual and the individual's rights.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Well, it was self-reliance,
Yeah.
right? It was about self-reliance
Right.
because they came here,
Mhm.
they had to settle, they had to build villages
Right.
and figure out ways to feed themselves, to
Mhm.
sustain themselves. So they were self-reliant, and
Right.
it's that self-reliance, I think, that empowers somebody
Mhm.
to want to live independently and be free thinking
Right.
and not to be ruled upon.
Right. Well, what's really scary, the thing that scared the hell out of me the most about COVID, right, was to see how many Americans no longer hold that way of thought.
Mm-hmm.
They no longer think that way. For millions and millions of Americans, government is their king. Government is their nanny, regardless of who runs it. The government is their boss. Now, all of these protesters want somebody else to run it other than Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is more, of I would say, a classical liberal thinker, in that he wants to minimize government and maximize individual liberty and rights, which is something these people don't like. Right.
Right.
They can't function without the nanny state.
They need reliance. They need
Right.
direction. They need
Right.
leadership
Right. And
in order to function.
And that's taught and inbred
Mhm.
over a very long period of time. And so the 20th century was so destructive of the American constitutional system, especially beginning with, the 16th Amendment, the Federal Reserve Act, and then we get the dictator of 4 terms as president, FDR,
Right.
and the huge, massive move of the federal government as all of American stand state rather than the focus on your state government.
So you went down to the Arizona Capitol when you were out visiting some of these protests, right?
Yeah.
We have some video footage that you captured. I'd like to go ahead and play that, Steve. If you can put up video 2 at the Arizona Capitol, No Kings Rally.
Recall in both the 2020 and the
I'm stuck in traffic.
2024 election cycle that they were denied a choice in who would represent them on the presidential ticket for the Democratic Party. When it comes to CISA, the national security agencies that they were in charge of, it was these very people that supported striking down your First Amendment rights if you were a conservative and allowing only liberal speech to prevail. Does that sound like freedom to you? This is freedom. The fact that the United States gives these folks the ability to come out and protest. That's what freedom's about. But if you're a conservative and you want to protest, God forbid.
Yeah. So I got out, walked around a bit. I actually made an episode of What the Fuck's Up from down there. And they had, Trump in the stockade, the thing where you put your hands and your head in.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, we're having an issue with Restream and the titles to the show didn't update properly. So sorry about that, guys. I hope you're still watching. I hope you're still, like, share, and all that fun stuff.
We will change the title and description afterwards, but it did not change the way it's supposed to automatically. So we'll fix that later.
Well, now I got to talk about something entirely different, though. I mean, come on. What does it say? 2 for $1 Big Macs at McDonald's? Oh, okay. Last week?
Yeah, last week's title and description. Well, that's all right.
Right.
So, Brian, I want to ask your thoughts on this because isn't it kind of an irony that they're out there exercising their First Amendment rights? They're freely walking on the grounds of our state capitol, enjoying 100%. The outdoors, speaking out against government leadership, which you would be shot in some countries for doing, while simultaneously saying that they're living under a dictator.
Right. Yeah. I think to most Americans, and I think that's why you saw the crowd, right? It was not.
Easy Republic said about 170. Does that sound about right? 170, 180 people?
Nah, there had to be more than 170, 180 people there. I would say maybe throughout the day, 1,000 people, no more than that. But none of the venues I visited, and again, I visited 3 of them twice, had a significant number of people. But that's fine. We as Americans have the First Amendment right to assemble, right? We can peaceably assemble, and that's the key. Peaceably assemble. We have the right to free speech under the First Amendment. We have the right to, get redress of grievances from our government, right? We have the right to complain about our government officials and how our government officials work. And the ultimate irony is, right, these very people supported the national security agencies, cybersecurity and infrastructure security agencies' efforts to censor our speech, right, conservative speech.
Right.
And I mean, what's a big example? The biggest example you can think of.
Well, I mean, there were a lot of different instances, but if I give a personal example, I recall going on social media and seeing leftists commenting about me, saying that I should be imprisoned and I should be locked up for my view.
Right.
And these are the same people in this same movement that are out there protesting, exercising that very right that they want to take away from me. But then you've got, at the governmental level, you've got the disinformation task forces that were created, right? And the 6-person team that Stephen Richer implemented to scour social media and report threat incidents.
Well, but not only that, you have the Center for Internet Security, which works with the NSA's CISA as a private non-governmental organization. We're going to talk about CIS a little bit more, but it was also, as a non-governmental agency, engaged in the act of censorship on behalf of and in partnership with CISA, right? Censoring conservative speech. You have all of these national security people coming out, working very actively to censor conservative speech and to say, oh, this speech is disinformation, malinformation, misinformation, whatever the case may be, right? And we know that CIS is in Arizona's judicial branch of government.
Yes.
We know CIS is in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. And we know CIS is in our elections department, right? And so...
Well, and here's what's interesting. And we'll break all this down as we move forward and transitioning into the Albert censor.
Right.
But you'll see that CIS has some deep ties to organizations that are heavily funded by Facebook, Google, and some of these agencies that have the capability to censor. So when the very agency that gives you a platform for free speech is funding and partnering with an organization that disdains free speech, you have this issue of conservative censorship.
You do. And so, other problems, with these folks, and their hypocrisy, their ultimate hypocrisy, really surrounds your rights as an individual in their totality, right? Many of the people that were downtown were avowed communists, right? And so that was one of the organizations that was the primary sponsor of this All Kings event in Arizona and throughout the United States. And so I'm wondering why, the billionaire heiress of Walmart who made her money, in a quasi-capitalistic system is so hell-bent on destroying that system. Maybe what people should start doing is what I've already done a long time ago. Don't shop at Walmart. Take your money somewhere else. Do not shop at Walmart. Because if they're going to work to destabilize the United States, then let them get their money from somewhere else.
It's really hard to do, and I know people get caught up in their routines, but we really need to avoid funding communism.
Yeah.
When you think about back during the days of Nazi Germany, there were a lot of companies that were driven out of the U.S. because they were funding the Nazis and the whole Nazi movement in Germany. And we have to think about it this way. These people are trying to fund communism. They're trying to fund socialism and these different systems that are not compatible with the U.S. Constitution or what we stand for as America.
Yeah, well, and some of the more interesting events, I think, sort of surrounding the No Kings rallies, they were calling them, as opposed to what they, I think, were intending to be, which were more along the riotous route. But you have active terrorism being conducted in, what is it, the state of Minnesota?
It was Minnesota. Yes.
And that is a really weird situation. I mean, how does this guy, goes to a house, shoots up a senator and his wife, right? Fires on him, shoots I think the senator 8 or 9 times, shot his wife multiple times, right? And then he leaves. And he goes to the woman who was
The other
Speaker
senator.
of the House.
Yes, she was the Speaker of the
She
House.
was the Speaker of the House, goes to their house and kills, assassinates her and her husband. Did you see the video of her after she voted for the bill that stripped illegal immigrants of health care benefits?
I did. Her voice was cracking and
God.
she actually teared up. I couldn't help but feel compassion for her.
Right. And she was scared to death.
But
Right.
she knew it was the right thing to do, and
Right.
she did what she felt was right for the
Right.
people.
Yeah.
And it's a sad deal. But she was terrified
Uh-huh.
and brokenhearted, and it was interesting for sure.
But, then, he kills these two and then somehow, gets away
Mhm.
and disappears, for a long time and has to cover like 10 miles, in a few hours? Anybody here in our studio audience remember how many hours it was?
It was 48 hours before they actually apprehended
Before they
him.
apprehended him, right?
Yeah.
But they found him in changed clothing, right? Somebody identified him in changed clothing. He's wearing a cowboy hat. He's
Right.
wearing a different outfit.
Right.
And this is after he exchanges gunfire with the police. The house is allegedly surrounded as he's exchanging gunfire with the police, and he manages to escape.
Right.
How's that possible? And then he shows up somewhere. His car's abandoned, and he's identified. He's wearing a cowboy hat and completely different clothes. And then you have him arrested outside of his house, not far from his
But it was in the woods surrounding his home. And here's the
Right.
interesting thing.
a $500,000 home.
They had been set up.
Uh-huh.
They had a perimeter there
Mhm.
for hours
Right.
before they sighted him on that trail cam.
Right.
And then did you see his apprehension photo? That was creepy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the picture of him being apprehended that kind of made national headlines. And I wish I had it. I would put it up on the screen. But
okay,
It
Steve
was-
can pull up web pages.
yeah, maybe
Find
you
a
can
picture of him.
find a
Pull it up.
picture of that arrest. That
Right.
would be great.
And I'm sorry, I had a brain cramp. Forgot what I was going to say there.
So Vance Bolter, right? The
Uh-huh.
assassin. He was appointed by the Tim Walz administration to a
Yep.
committee, right?
Mhm.
He had No Kings and anti-Trump paraphernalia in his car,
Right.
and then 24 hours later,
Right.
the media says, well, he was a pro-life conservative,
MAGA guy.
MAGA guy,
Right.
pro-Trump, and how they're excusing away this stuff
Uh-huh.
being in the cars. They're saying, well, he was going to go to the No Kings protest to
Mm-hmm. Right.
harm more people.
Right.
Are you buying it, Brian?
I'm not buying it. And that he was not only appointed by Tim Walz, he was appointed by the leftist governor before Tim Walz as well.
Right.
And so this guy was appointed by two left-wing governors. Facebook, immediately when he was identified, scrubbed him. You can't find anything about him on Facebook, right? But I have seen pictures floating around of him, at pro-Democrat rallies, wearing clothing that's very indicative of the fact that he's a Democrat. And then you have this purported kill list, right?
Yeah, please do, Steve. Bring that
We
up.
can keep talking while the browser's up, right? I don't know.
Well, I want the one of him being apprehended.
Yeah.
So put assassin captured or arrest footage here. Let's see what we can pull up.
Yeah, but
It's just a real creepy middle of the night image of him.
then the day after, his wife is stopped, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's got guns and ammo in the car. I've heard stories of up to $40,000 in cash and multiple passports.
Right.
What the fuck's up?
Well, and they're saying law enforcement is saying he acted alone.
Right.
They're saying he absolutely acted alone. They don't see any ties. They're tracing it down. Look, I think as time develops and more information comes out, I think we're going to find there's way more to this story. And I think we're going to have to do our own homework, right? The at-home detectives and internet sleuths are going to have to keep working, because I think the media is going to create an entire narrative around this that
Well,
is
maybe
just not believable.
maybe that was the whole point of the assassination, right? He went, it's my understanding, FBI is reporting that he went to 2 other Minnesota legislators' homes, but nobody was harmed at either of those, thank goodness. And then he, the hit list he had, there were people on the hit list who died,
Right.
a year or 2 ago. There are people on the hit list who were no longer in office. And so I'm not sure what kind of hit list this was, but it's come under a pretty intense scrutiny by people on Twitter, like you said, the internet sleuths that are looking at it and saying it appears to be a retyped hit list. This is his friend, right, that he lived with, and
Legislator before, one of the legislators that had gotten shot.
yeah, that's not it.
This is his friend. Yeah.
Yeah, he lived in a house with 4 other guys, and then he had his.
So we'll
Yeah.
find the arrest photo at another
Right.
time and show it to you.
Yeah.
Um,
But I've heard stories that, he was going between jobs. He, he couldn't find work. He had several failed businesses, blah, blah, blah. You know what? Well, it's a good training. And so, we, he lived in a $500,000 house, and his wife was able to get 40 grand up to 40 grand in cash. It's my understanding fairly quickly. How many people can do that?
I know I couldn't.
Yeah, I can muster probably about $4.39.
Right.
All right. So I'm going to make my escape on $4.39. I'm probably not going to go very far.
You're not going to get
Right.
very far there, Brian.
Yeah,
Especially with gas prices,
Yeah, so there was another story out of Pennsylvania that I think is interesting, and I just want to talk about in terms of conspiracy theories. Yeah, go ahead, bring it up. This is the picture.
That's the one. Look at that picture when he surrendered. That's just a creepy picture.
Huh. Yeah, what's he looking at?
I don't know, but that's the only footage that they released of the actual apprehension of him.
Yeah.
And I know it was at night, and it's probably taken through night vision, so that makes everything look creepier, but it's just, he's staring off into nothingness.
He is, totally.
And I found that extraordinarily bizarre.
Right.
So thank you, Steve, for muscling through that for me.
Right. And so, yeah, like I said, learning experiences, by God. But anyway, in Pennsylvania, did you hear about the incident in Pennsylvania at a No Kings Rally? A gentleman was dressed as a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
He had an illegal firearm tucked in the back of his trousers. Somebody saw him and thought he looked odd. And this was at a time, earlier in the day when protesters began to assemble. And so this guy, somebody reported him to the police as being odd. And so they found the weapon. They detained and arrested the individual. But he was dressed like a cop.
Well, so was Van.
Right. So he was dressed, in he had his security car, I guess, with lights on. He had his uniform on, and he tried to pass himself off as a cop. Now, if I'm a conspiracy theorist, because, I see what's happening, you have all of these communist groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things you do if you're a communist and you want to foment communist revolution, right, is your goal is to draw out the repressive state apparatus. Right? We have the ideological state apparatus, which are our schools, our churches, our other institutions that sort of reproduce us ideologically. And then we have the repressive state apparatus, which, puts its boot on us when we do something wrong or we violate the rules. Right. And so they want the repressive state apparatus to be in the forefront. And so if you can get a lot of people believing that the cops are out there killing legislators and protesters, right? You can start driving people to violence against law enforcement in fairly large numbers. And so, I would hope that's not the case, that the people involved with these rallies were simply exercising their First Amendment right, and that there were no plans to engage in this. This is terrorism, 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's horrific.
Right.
Look, I don't care what side of the political aisle you are on.
I don't either.
Assassination,
Yeah.
harming somebody, killing
Right.
people, there's no excuse for it
And-
whatsoever. There's no excuse. And
Yeah.
if you are out there and you're having those emotions
Mhm.
of aggression or violence because of the current political state, please get some help, because that's not okay, and it's not going to serve any purpose for you, for your family, or to change anything.
Yeah. And Steve, your coffee's ready.
So let's talk about
It's been here for 20 minutes, Steve.
let's talk about the Albert censor. Dr. Dougherty brought
I
that
wanted
up.
to talk about one other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Especially to the Los Angeles riots, right? There's a lot of shit going on internationally, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, what do you if you want to reshape the world, well, who do you get out of the game? Right? What's the
Mhm.
biggest country that you don't want?
Right. You don't want the
Right.
United States involved.
Yeah, you gotta sort of cut the United States off at the knees. And
Right.
so, what would internal domestic strife do to the United States in its ability to stop some of these internationalists from reshaping the world?
Well, I mean, at-home
Yeah.
chaos is obviously going to have to
Right.
take priority
Right.
over anything
Yeah.
outside of our borders.
Right. And so, if you look at what's taking place in LA, it's really interesting that the Mexican government is coming out very vocally trying to dictate to the United States. The president of Mexico, right? Mexico makes a hell of a ton of money off of their alliance with China.
Mhm.
They import all of the fentanyl, the precursors for fentanyl. They get all of this stuff from China. They make a ton of money exporting it and selling it into the United States illegally. Right. And so she's coming out now, and she has actually came out and called for instability within the United States. The president of the Mexican Senate has actually come out and said he's going to put forth legislation to try to take back their old former territories. Right. Now the Mexican president, I think it was yesterday or the day before, came out and said she doesn't want to see ICE at the World Soccer Championships in LA, right? So she wants to dictate U.S. policy in the southwestern United
Right.
States. So these people are actively seeking to destroy us, and they have a cartel army that is involved in what's taking place in LA and a lot of places through the country that, with such instability, it simply, it makes America's ability to project force somewhat limited. Right?
Right, absolutely. And
Yeah.
you've got Governor Newsom and all these other politicians that are jumping on board,
Right.
kind of fueling the flames as well.
Yeah.
So
Well, you have that group SEDA, right? Or
Mhm.
whatever it's called. It's my understanding that it receives over 65% of its funding for the LA riots from the California Department of Social Services. So these are taxpayers paying to pay looters and
Right.
rioters. This is yours. That one's mine. To destroy their own communities.
right.
right? And to make life worse for people in LA, because a lot of people like the Venmo cars, I guess, these driverless taxis, and and they're gone. They're leaving LA because of the destruction of that's being wrought on their cars.
Right?
So I don't know. They're definitely not there to make your life better. Oh well, cool.
So you ready to move on to the Albert sensors?
We can talk about
All
we
right.
can talk about the
So-
Albert sensor and CIS in other terms as well.
Absolutely. So Brian had talked about, I don't know if you heard the audio commentary as he was driving past the protesters there at the Capitol, but he was talking about the fact that these protesters are exercising their First Amendment right, and they're talking about this freedom that they want to live under, which is fine, great. We can all agree on those things, while supporting the censorship of conservative speech. And one of the primary censors of speech regarding elections is CIS and CISA. So CIS, back in, I believe it was 2018, worked in conjunction with CISA and their Einstein apparatus to develop a sensor called the Albert sensor. And the thought about what the Albert sensor would do is you would place it on your networks and it would feed back information to CIS, where they have a 24/7, 365-day, around the clock monitoring. And if any malicious actor, virus or malware attempted to infiltrate the networks at these elections departments or other departments, as Brian had pointed out, like the judicial system, the Department of Transportation, that it would alert CIS. CIS would chase it down to determine whether it's a credible threat and then immediately notify the department. So we have this same organization that's trying to suppress our speech, also in charge of security of our election apparatus. Steve, can you do me a favor and go ahead and play video 3? This is a Center for Information Security Albert sensor ad. So this is the video they push out when they're trying to get counties and states to sign up for Albert sensor.
Identifying and mitigating malicious activity on a network is key to defending against cyber threats. But how can you quickly determine if a threat is actionable? With Albert Network Monitoring and Management, it's easy. Network traffic is inspected against an SLTT-focused, specially curated signature set that looks for anomalous or malicious activity. If a signature match is detected, an alert is sent to CIS's 24/7/365 Security Operations Center, where security experts conduct further analysis. Event notifications are only sent to you if a valid, actionable threat is found. These notifications are typically sent within 6 minutes of detection. All false positives are suppressed, which helps eliminate common log and alert fatigue to reduce time-chasing events. CIS is home to the MS ISAC and EI ISAC, and our visibility into threats faced by state, local, tribal, and territorial government sector networks allow us to help defend you against SLTT-specific threats. Learn more about Albert today.
So what do you think of that, Brian?
Well, it's interesting that, we had Walter Doherty on our show, and he said the Albert sensor, sort of goes between the election department and the VPN and a lot of the election equipment and technology related to the actually running of our elections. Their website says, oh, no, we don't do that, right? We only put the Albert sensor to monitor non-election related traffic for elections department, right? Like all of the email, right? The election department sends and receives, like, all of their servers that are connected to the internet and all of their other, hardware and equipment that they say is non-election related, right?
Right. Even though they specifically market to election security.
Election security, that's correct, 100%. And so, there's some question, and we're still researching this issue because we haven't found a contract that CIS has with Maricopa County, have we?
Well, we know that there is a contract because of statements that Adrian Fontes made, and we'll
Right.
get into that later. But we were able to track down the contract.
Right.
So there's one contract that all agencies, whether it be state, local, federal, or tribal, signs this contract. And I've seen it for other states, and it's
Right.
always identical. And it's actually posted on the CIS website.
And we're going to talk about some of that contract because it's real interesting.
Yeah, I think we should. Steve,
Yeah.
do you want to put up slide number 4? This is excerpts that you specifically isolated out of the contract, Brian. And
Okay.
it's under the section of what needs to be provided by the customer.
All right. So the customer shall provide the sensor server to be used for Albert monitoring and management services using the specifications provided by the Center for Internet Security, and in type and numbers as agreed to in this agreement. Customer shall also provide logistic support in form of rack space, right? And so if you have a server, I don't know if a lot of people know what a server is. You have these huge racks, right? And so the more space you need, the more of these little servers you need, right? And so you have big racks that, I guess could be likened to dressers or something.
Yeah, they're
And
metal
so
shelves, like
the
maybe
metal
shelving you
shelves.
would put in your garage.
And you slide a server in, and when you need new space, you pick an empty slot and you slide a new server into that slot, right?
Right.
And so the customer, let's say we're talking about Maricopa County Elections Department, has to provide the rack space where they slide this server in that has the Albert sensor on it. They've got to supply the electricity. This is another interesting component because, elections equipment manufacturers and suppliers will, go to their graves swearing that there's absolutely no internet connectivity. But that's one thing the counties and the other government entities having Albert sensors are required to provide to CIS, internet connectivity.
Right.
Right, which means that everything going through that server, that CIS would have access to through their Albert sensor, all of these people routinely hacking CISA would likely have access to as well. And any other infrastructure necessary to support communications at, the customer's expense. And so, the county has to supply the server and they have to supply the internet connectivity for said server, presumably so that the Center for Internet Security can monitor. Right?
Well, here's another interesting part I want to point out. So if you look at 4A, it says current network diagrams to facilitate analysis of security events on the portion of customers' network being monitored. Network diagrams will need to be revised whenever there is a network change, which means these network diagrams and these things, some of which were denied to the Arizona Senate during their audit, are being provided to CIS.
Yeah.
These things that they say, well, this is critical infrastructure. We can't let people, know about our networking, our diagrams,
Right.
but they're they must provide this information to CIS.
They're required to give the map to their house, right? And I was talking I was talking to a computer expert earlier and asking about some of this, and what we're looking at and what we talked about is, requiring, that they provide the server, that it has internet access, and that they provide CIS a complete network diagram of their network. That's like providing burglars a blueprint to your house and the keys to the front door, the back door, and all the windows in the basement so people can get in.
Right.
And this is a non-governmental organization that was partnered with the Center for Internet Security. That was partnered with the National Security Agency, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to censor speech of Americans after, in the run up to and after 2020 election.
Well,
And so
absolutely. And we also know that they're partnered with a lot of other
Right.
organizations, which makes
Right.
this other part of the contract
scary as hell.
really scary.
But I want to go back to the one that was just up.
Okay, can you put up 4 again
that's
for
got
us,
section
Steve, please?
4 in it.
Contract provided by. Yes, bring back number 4.
All right. And so the providing of technical information, requiring that number C there, 4C, public and private IP address ranges, including a list of servers being monitored, including type, operating system, and configuration information, as well as a list of IP ranges and addresses that are not in use by the customer. That is, that's huge.
Absolutely.
That's identifying where all the doors and windows are at, essentially. And so, looking at this, basically you have a non-governmental organization, and we talked about, didn't we do this on the show earlier? What benefits does the government have for using NGOs to do their job?
Yes, so let's think about this. Number 1, they have no concern in violating an individual's rights.
Right.
They don't have any requirement to be transparent or provide public documents
Right.
to the people,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what was the other? Let's see, it was, and they can sell and exchange our information with whomever they want without accountability.
Right. And yeah, go ahead. One of the other interesting things about all of this, and maybe we go through and do the next one before we talk about that. So
I think we should. Steve, can you put up 5? This is, to me, Brian, the most terrifying part. And it's funny because you studied the contract, I studied the contract,
right?
And we both found this,
Right.
and we're like, oh, this is bad.
So counties contract with CIS, counties, tribal governments, states contract with CIS to perform these very critical functions, but CIS reserves the right pursuant to this contract, as it says, CIS may utilize a third-party subcontractor to provide any or all of the services required of it under this agreement. Prior to any such subcontracting, CIS shall enter into a written agreement with subcontractor in which subcontractor accepts responsibility for all obligations that would otherwise be performed by CIS in accordance with the terms of this agreement. So what this is saying is that the Center for Internet Security could literally subcontract its role as a provider of these internet security services to Maricopa County Elections Department, to the Communist Party of China, or to whatever other third-party vendor they deem fit.
Now, there is literally
This is
no
scary.
limitation here.
Yeah.
It doesn't say to not include other governmental
Right.
agencies.
Right.
As a matter of fact, if you go on their website, they indicate that any contracts that are funded in part or whole by grant money from the Department of Homeland Security or the DOJ or any other federal grant, all of your data and information is shared
Right.
with the federal
Right.
government. So think about that. We may be in a situation here where, what if one of their funders has
Right.
ties to Venezuela or
Right.
communist China, right?
Yeah.
They
Nobody
could
knows.
share and exchange our information,
Right.
and nobody would know.
Right. And so they claim. Yeah, you can pull it down. They claim to be given oversight by guess who?
CISA.
The National Security Agency's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, an organization created in large part to silence conservative American speech, right? And so we've showed it on this show, and we've showed it on other shows. Susan Spalding, in her own words, right? She's dismayed when Trump is sworn in 2016. And so they set about to work to create institutions that will ensure that people like Donald Trump don't win the next election, right? And so that's what this is about.
Well, and we know for a fact, based on CIS's own report, that 39 states are now utilizing the Albert sensor, and that does not include individual counties at the county level within that state that are also using the Albert sensor. And we know for a fact that it's being used here in the state of Arizona, and it's being touted as an election protection safeguard, right? So, Steve, can you put up number 6, please, the Adrian Fontes? So Adrian Fontes actually testified before a committee, a U.S. Senate committee, on November 1st of 2023. Okay, can you scroll that up just a little bit for me? And in there, he talks about how they're mitigating and taking proactive steps to build voter trust. So this is the build voter trust, Brian. They are partnering with CISA on cybersecurity threat assessment of critical election systems, starting with the offering of Albert sensors. Our partnership and technology tools provided by CISA have only grown as we defend against foreign actors who are committed to wreaking havoc on our election system and our democracy.
Right. And see, notice it's just like CISA when when the people who created CISA, Susan Spalding, when they took it into our judicial branch of government, right? And when they took it to the public, what were they saying? They were saying, oh, it's
Russia, Russia.
Russia. And it's the exact same thing. So they've used this Russia fraud to basically embed themselves in our election equipment and our elections infrastructure. And they've used it also as a tool to censor speech. This is about total control, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. And it is to give you that kind of warm and fuzzy feeling. We're going to put these sensors on there. We're going to have really smart people looking at your elections. And, shockingly to some people, because they believe that Texas has done quite a good job with their elections. And overall, I can say they've done a hell of a lot better than Arizona. But even Texas is touting the use of the Albert sensors in their voter registration database.
Well, and they're in, we believe, the Arizona voter registration databases as well, aren't they?
Yes, that is correct. Steve, can you put up number 7? So this is the Texas Secretary of State addressing measures by which they are going to secure the election in 2024. And so if you look under working with federal and local partners, it says that they're participating in the Election Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, right? This is the EISAC, which is CIS. It's part of a CIS partnership to give them relevant information with respect to safeguarding our elections and being aware of potential cyber threats, right? And then if you go down to protecting election infrastructure, it talks about sharing their information with MSISAC, which is CISA, right? Department of Homeland Security. The MSISAC is part of CISA. And then at the bottom of that red box, it says installed an active Albert sensor on our voter registration database that alerts our agency when any suspicious cyber activity occurs. So they have gone the extra step to install these specifically in their voter registration database in the state of Texas.
Right. Well, and some voter equipments have Albert sensors built in, don't they?
Oh, yeah. So I haven't found anything yet on all of them, but I
Right.
did stumble across this interesting fact. Steve,
Mhm.
can you put up number 8? So, election ES&S,
Mhm.
right? Better known as ES&S. They are an election and voting equipment. ES&S is used in 13 of the 15 counties in the state of Arizona, and it is one of the most widely used election systems all across the United States. And if you look here, this is a statement from the Vice President of System Security for ES&S, Chris Lanchin. And he says ES&S uses internal and external security monitoring of our corporate IT environments, including 5 Albert sensors covering our voter registration environment.
Yeah, they're big in Albert's big in voter registration, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the idea that these contractors are using these services as well, it kind of makes you wonder where else it's being used. ES&S, it says,
Right.
also participates with the Department of Homeland Security
Uh-huh.
studies, which is CISA.
Right. Now, CIS claims on their website that they don't actually get to see any traffic, that none of their employees get to see any traffic or anything of that nature unless something is red flagged as being a threat.
Right.
But if you talk to experts and professionals in the field, they pretend to use this database, right? That's got a list of all of these different malwares and other things in it, so that if it sees it, it can raise a red flag. But you could add just about anything to those lists, according to computer experts I've talked about. You could, for example, add at blemlawaz.com, and anytime that showed up, boom, it would raise a flag, and someone at CIS would be able to view that, right?
Right.
The mere fact that they do have the ability to view all of this internal email traffic, and if they're in our judicial branch, if they're in our county attorney's offices, if they're in our elections department, and somebody does actually have the ability, even though they claim they don't look at traffic, if there is the ability, somebody can look at that traffic. And
Absolutely.
that's a complete potential intrusion into our entire election system.
Well, and they've got a lot of really interesting ties. I mean, they're funded by, well, USAID, right? Federal grants, local grants, private grant money.
Right.
The Department of Homeland Security helps fund them. The Department of Justice gives them
Right.
grants. But they've got a lot of interesting connections.
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
They share office space, don't they, with some interesting organizations?
Not only do they share office space, they have a lot of connections, authors, and different people kind of
Right.
between these. Steve, can you put up number 9 for us, please? So this is the Center for Internet Security. They share an address with Global Cyber Alliance, which has federal government officials from CISA in it, right? So the Global Cyber Alliance is housed at their address, along with groups such as Center for Tech and Civic Life. For those that don't know, we'll get into more detail
They're not
in a minute.
partisan, are they?
Well, it depends. I mean, what do you think about Zuckerberg?
Oh, well, yeah, Zuckerberg was, all of these are partisan organizations.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, Facebook is one of them. So
Yeah.
you've got CTCL, which is a Zuckerberg organization, right? They're the same ones that funded all the Dropbox money and all of the money in 2020 for the
Right.
COVID upgrades
Right.
and put out all of the special training videos.
Even though we're going to talk about the fact that it's illegal to use private monies in our elections, isn't it?
It is, yes. And we'll talk about that too,
Yeah.
because that's a big deal to this, and they point it out. So
Right.
does CTCL. And then you've
Mhm.
also got the Center for Election Innovation and Research, or CEER.
Right.
CEER is housed there. So you've got CTCL, Brennan Center for Justice, Facebook, and the Center for Election Innovation and Research. So you've got these far left groups that are
Mhm.
housed in the same address, and conveniently all with their hands in the cookie jar
Right.
of our U.S. elections,
Right.
right?
Well, the Brennan Center for Justice was one of the organizations working with Katie Hobbs, wasn't it, to undermine the audit in 2021 in Arizona?
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it was. There was, and I can't remember her name, but there was a Indian doctor
Mhm.
who focused on elections. She's an attorney, but she had her like PhD in something else, and she was very involved in what was happening here in Arizona.
Right.
And then, they like to talk about how they get a lot of their funding from the U.S. government. And at the same time, they're taking all of these private fundings. Look at the Pierre Omidyar Democracy Fund,
Uh-huh.
funded $290,000 in grant money. So there's a lot of private money
Right.
going into CIS. This is not just a government entity here.
No. Well, I would refer to it as gosh, would I refer to it in my complaint against Maricopa County Attorney's Office for all their email communications with CIS, as a quasi-governmental organization, right?
Right.
Because it's taking private funds, not in the volume that it's taking government funds. The primary source of its funding are government organizations like USAID and the NSA, and so they're also performing government-related functions, right? Monitoring our elections and providing election security is something that our government is supposed to be doing on our behalf, as opposed to farming it out to a non-governmental organization that then has the contractual ability to farm it out to somebody else.
Right. Well, let's look at some of the organizations that share their address, some
Right.
potential farms, as you would put it, for
Yeah.
them to send our information. Steve, put up number 10, if you would, please. So this is the Center for Tech and Civic Life, right? The CTCL. And it
Oh my
is
God, Chicago.
Chicago-based.
Right.
Look at who funds them. You've got the School Foundation, the Democracy Fund, the Knight Foundation, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, right? I mean, these are a lot of definitely left of center organizations. But in the months leading up to the 2020 election, Mark Zuckerberg donated $350 million to the CDCL, right? The Silicon Valley Community Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And
The Democratic Party's Hogwarts for digital wizardry. Huh. Interesting. Major training center for left of center digital activists over the decade of its existence. And so these organizations have definitely a partisan bent, and most of these organizations have historically been anti-Trump.
oh, absolutely. Yeah, take it down, Steve. So the CTCL, if you do some research on them, a lot of states, as a matter of fact, I think it was 28 states,
Mm-hmm.
have actually created some kind of regulation or law, like you talked about, that prevent private companies or NGOs
Right.
from funding elections. Now, some of them have loopholes because it's just
Mhm.
giving them direct money. It doesn't
Right.
mean they can't do in-kind services.
Right.
So in 2024, the CTCL spent $3.7 million in funding to local governments for the administration of the 2024 election. They also issued a report where they have compiled the data, information, social media contacts, and email information for 21,500 election officials that were newly elected, appointed, or hired, that they are now holding weekly, bi-weekly, and monthly trainings.
Ah, sounds kind of like States United's work with Stephen Richer, right? They have their bi-weekly meetings.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And then
they're
you've
all the
got-
same people.
They are. And then you've got SEER. Can you put
Uh-huh.
up number 11, Steve? So SEER, interestingly enough, is also involved with Mark Zuckerberg. They donated $50 million. And if you notice, Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
SEIR, and STCL are all using the same address
Uh-huh.
as CIS, CIS. Now, what's really interesting about the CEIR is who runs the CEIR. In previous episodes, we've talked about a man by the name of David Becker.
Mm-hmm.
David Becker wrote a book about the big lie, right? Which is
Right.
the 2020 wasn't stolen. It's a big lie.
Right.
And he went on a tour with this book and partnered with the McCain Institute to do
Mhm.
education and awareness to teach people about how the election wasn't really stolen.
Well, John McCain, would you say he was just a little bit anti-Trump?
I would say just a little bit.
Yeah, he got
And
a,
his family,
yeah.
very, very outspoken
Yeah,
anti-Trump.
he got a huge spanking from Donald Trump. And then we know that it was his organization that started that Russiagate scam and then
Right.
passed it on to Hillary Clinton after he got his butt spanked by Donald
Right.
Trump so that she could use it in the election against Donald Trump. And from that, and you put that one thing back up you just had on there because I want to just reiterate a point. If you look what's on screen right now, created in the wake of the 2016 election in response to foreign interference, right? And this again is a reference to all of this smack that Susan Spalding was running around talking about after she was dismayed when Donald Trump won the 2016 election. This is all based, folks. All of these people, all of these organizations, all of these companies are embedded in your elections based upon a lie.
Oh, absolutely. And these people are totally anti-Trump.
Oh, yeah, take it down.
Okay.
I thought you were telling me, go away, bend down or something. Lower your mic, I don't know.
Steve, can you raise up 12? Put up number 12. So this is David Becker. So David Becker is just like Suzanne Spalding is thought to be a renowned elections expert, elections trainer, like
Right.
this forefront person for election, everything elections, right?
Mm-hmm.
And David Becker in 2005, he worked for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And while he was working for the Department of Justice, they sued the city of Boston for voting infractions, violation of civil rights. And David Becker contacted the city of Boston and offered his services to fight the Department of Justice in the civil rights complaint. And so the head of the Department of Justice found out, right, Brad Schultzman, and filed a complaint against him saying it was the most unethical thing he'd ever seen in all of his time of working, and that Becker was a hardcore leftist that couldn't stand conservatives. So it got even worse. David Becker had an email exchange with the people in the city of Boston that said horrific things about Republicans. He went on to say that Republicans were unethical and just horrible, horrible things about the Republican Party.
Right.
Eventually, the complaint was dismissed.
Right.
Conveniently, it was just dismissed. Here's the interesting thing. I tried really hard to find these emails.
Mhm.
They were part of an article back in 2020 talking about his ties to Mark Zuckerberg. And it was Legal Newsline had issued an article that had these emails that were FOIA'd by the Department of Justice during this ethics investigation. A lot of it's been scrubbed off the internet. I cannot find anything. So you internet sleuths out there, if you're able to go out and find those emails,
Yeah, send them to us. We'd like to see them.
yeah, we'd love to see them. I'm going to keep looking, but if anybody out there can find them, please get a hold of us and let us know.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead and take it down, Steve. So these are the people that are sitting there looking at the transmission of data coming out of our governmental agencies, our judicial system, our election system, and God only knows what else. I know for sure the Department of Transportation. And, we talk about no dark money in our election, right? We passed these laws saying that we can't use private funding,
Right.
yet we are sticking privately funded sensors on all of our election equipment systems and networks. Help me understand that one, Brian.
Well, I think the way they try to get around it is charging counties for the services they provide, even though they're, in large part funded by other resources, both coming from, the government and coming from the private sector. A lot of Congress has actually allocated, a lot of funds to install these Albert sensors on our elections networks and other networks. And so, the problem I have with all of this is all part of the big lie, right? That David Becker's
real
book was
big
a
lie.
big lie.
Yes.
The fact that the 2020 election wasn't stolen is the big lie, right? And so they use this as a tool to push they use the big lie of what's become known as Russiagate, right? You have members of the Federal Bureau of Investigations who have gone to prison for lying to a FISA court to get secret warrants to wiretap the Trump campaign. This is the very heart of partisan politics that our national security agencies, including the Department of Justice and the FBI, jumped wholeheartedly into after Trump was elected. They were partisan before that because they became a very partisan group of people. It's this whole Cold War mentality they have. We know what's best for America, right?
Right.
And so, they all deemed that Trump wasn't best for America because what does Trump want to do? He wants to stop the wars and he wants to sort of change the focus of the United States federal government. And so, they're not getting their way. And that means what? What happens when your mission changes and you can no longer do what you wanted to do? They're going to lose a lot of funding.
Yep.
And so you have this big lie, this whole hoax that was foisted on the American people after Donald Trump was elected in 2016. And then they pushed it with COVID, right, to conceal what was happening in the 2020 elections because you can't watch. You might get sick and die. Right. Yeah. And so that's what was taking place, folks. And so, the big lie is David Becker's book. The big lie is all of this trash about, I know other countries try to mess with us and we do it to other countries. So what's, all's fair in love and war, right? And so, but most of what all of this intrusion into our election systems is premised on is itself a fraud. It's the big lie.
Right. Well, and then there becomes the concern that are these sensors, and I'm going to put just a conspiracy hat on for a minute, right?
Why not? We're right most of the time.
So we've talked to data and technology people, including Dr. Walter Dougherty, and we know that the information exchange kind of flows back and forth. Steve, can you put up image 13? So this is a graph of kind of data flow. just for people to look at. But isn't there a concern, Brian, that if they are, as they state in their advertisement, if they are eliminating what they consider uncredible threats and not reporting those, that they may have intrusions in these networks that are not being reported?
That 100%. But here's the ultimate sort of irony that I can't figure out. And I'm going to try to find the language here. But okay, it's under rumor control. And it says all about Albert. Albert is a cybersecurity service that many election officials count on to alert them about a network-level cyber threat to their non-voting systems. Learn about what Albert does and does not do in this resource. Okay, so let's see here. Let me go to the next tab over. CIS and election security. Election offices use a significant amount of technology that has nothing to do with the actual casting or counting of ballots. Election officials depend on cybersecurity systems to protect these non-voting systems. And so, CIS is sort of putting forth this idea that they aren't connected to any election systems. But where did you get this data flow graph?
So that was from a cybersecurity expert that has been researching Albert, posted up on the internet.
And this
for
shows
the flow.
This shows the Albert sensors connected directly to the electronic voting system. So what's rumor and what's not?
Right. We don't know for sure, but here's what we do know is that these things are being inserted into our election equipment or our networks, right? Our servers, our systems, whatever they want to admit to or not admit to. And they are partnered with and funded by and in partnership with Google, Facebook, Rockefeller Foundation, Democracy Fund, Women's Donor Network, the Centers for Democracy and Technology, the Voting Information Project, Centers for Civic Design, the Knight Foundation. Oh, and you'll love this one, Brian. The same one responsible for our motor voter voting laws under Bill Clinton, Rock the Vote. Believe it or not, they are associated with and donated by Rock the Vote as well. So you've got these leftist organizations who are funding this project.
Right.
So if it were the opposite, if the opposite were true, and let's say Donald Trump came out and said, I've got all this extra money, so you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build the biggest and best security system for elections all across the globe. The left would come unhinged.
I can do that in 10 seconds.
Build a network across the world.
Well, I can build the most secure elections in the history of the world in 10 seconds, right?
I bet you could.
And
What is it, Brian?
We go back to precinct level voting on paper ballots where members of the precinct, the people working the polling place, count them at the polling place and report their numbers back to the central tabulating or counting facility so they can add all the different precincts together. And voila, you have elections done on the same day. You have elections done that are very secure. They're very, very difficult to impact fraudulently on a scale that's going to disrupt the entire system.
But you do know that the election officials and experts are saying that would just be too expensive as opposed to the billions upon billions of private and public money that is currently being used in our election system. It's absolutely absurd.
Well,
absolutely absurd because you're right. It's cheaper, it's easier, it's secure, and the people get to control their election.
Right, and they would also lose their One point of potential intrusion via the internet. And so, Arizona law also, we've been fighting cases where the county says, oh, now it's illegal to put, the database, the voter registration database on the internet, right?
Right.
What is the voter registration database? If the Albert sensor is between, the internet because CIS has to monitor it,
Right.
and the voter registration database, the internet has direct access through that Albert sensor to the voter registration database. One would presume,
Absolutely.
if you're a good hacker, like all of these people who keep hacking the national security agencies, cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, without ever getting caught from within the United States, probably maybe a city called Langley or something like that. But I don't know what's in Langley. What's in Langley, Steve? Yeah.
So
The government.
the bottom line is some people may look at this and say we're being conspiracy theorists. There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong here. They've done nothing wrong here. But we're not the only ones that have these fears.
No,
There
not
are
at all.
counties
Yeah.
and states, along with election
Mhm.
integrity computer experts all across the country.
Right.
But I think it's interesting how many counties are now starting to question these contracts and what's happening with the Albert sensor.
Well, before we go down that road, do you know anybody in the state of Arizona questioning the use of Albert sensors here? Aside from us, obviously,
I don't. I don't know
I
that
don't
it's
either.
been an issue.
Right? And so you have all of these people in the state legislature that claim to be, military. They want to lock up the keys to the software, so nobody can get access to it at the state level because the National Security Agency CISA has been somewhat pulled out of these functions by the Trump administration.
Right.
And so why aren't they talking about these Albert sensors? Because the Albert sensors serve as a potential point of intrusion into our election system, right?
Absolutely. I don't know. I mean, I have to give them a little grace because I've heard about the Albert sensors before,
Mhm.
but I don't think it ever really stuck in my
Right.
radar until we had those conversations with Dr. Dougherty. And
Right.
then I was like, okay, maybe this is
Uh-huh.
worth looking into. And come to find out it is. And I don't think we're done. We're still learning about it, right?
Oh yeah,
So,
we're going to keep digging so that we can keep doing shows on it
absolutely.
because the people deserve to know more than about any subject about their election.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's a fundamental right.
Uh-huh.
And Steve, I want to just pull up, if you could pull up 14. So there are some counties out there that are starting to raise red flags. There are legislators out there. And I found this very fascinating because it talks about the failure of the Albert system and points to that.
Failure.
Yes.
So it didn't do what it said it was going to do.
So
Interesting.
Grant County refused. Right. And this is Washington, mind you. This is Washington State, which
But
is
Washington's an interesting state. If you go to Eastern Washington, it's very conservative. It's only on the coast where they're fairly radical, right?
well, that's good then because they're
Yeah.
doing some good work out there. In Grant County, they refused to install the Albert sensor due to contractual issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also, Lincoln County became a victim of a ransomware attack, and CIS never alerted the county to the ransomware hack from a known ransomware site. Now, according to our tech experts we talked to, Brian, before the show, didn't they say that a ransomware hack, especially a ransomware hack from a known ransomware, should be, it's like elementary.
It's elementary. He said it's the most basic thing that any anti-intrusion software would pick up first. Right? He said it's not a very difficult thing. It's very basic and elementary, like you said. It's the easiest thing for software like this to catch. And of course it didn't. It missed it.
So this instance resulted in them uninstalling it, canceling their contract, and also led to Ferry County leading a movement to stop Albert sensors. But it gets better. Ferry County started doing their homework, and the commissioners there brought up some concerns that I think is good for us to kind of wrap up with. And that is they were given restrictions on how they could upgrade their system, which would give a third party control over needed improvements on their county network.
Wow.
They wanted them to give third party control to their county network. If they asked Ferry County to do this, Brian, what are the odds they may have asked other counties to give up control?
100%. I mean, that's exactly what we were reading in the contract, right? They have the right to delegate their responsibilities under the contract terms to third parties.
And the good news is Ferry County actually read the contract,
Right.
right? But
Yeah.
they also went on to say that they weren't comfortable with the black box system having access to, ready? All data on their computer networks rather than just election related systems.
And one would think that these government computer networks, right, regardless of whether or not they're tabulation equipment or anything of that nature, they should be air gapped, right? They should be running on virtual private networks. But given the fact that they have to give CIS internet access so that it can interact with the Albert sensor and monitor their systems, that puts all of our governmental computer networks at risk. And what's even crazier is the State Bar of Arizona did a seminar, a CLE, in which they were telling law firms to allow the National Security Agency, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which works with CIS, to probe their systems, right? This is an effort by these people to get into every single computer network in the United States.
Producer Steve wants to say something, but before I turn it over to him, I just want to add, I don't think we're just dealing with elections here. I think we've opened something up much bigger. We already know the judicial system could be involved. How many sheriff's departments?
Right.
How many courts?
Right.
How many schools?
Right.
Where are these Albert sensors being used, and how much of our data is vulnerable to Mark Zuckerberg, David Becker, CISA, the CIA, the CIS? We don't know.
The DOJ.
Go ahead, Steve.
I just wanted to, this is going back a couple of years now, Shelby. Do you remember when we were talking to Royce Flora and even Joe Arpaio? This is going back a few years, but they were fighting the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors from forcing their systems to be integrated into the counties. And,
absolutely. I think they called it, what did they call it, Steve? Secure Zone 2 data.
Well, that was the sheriff, but what I'm talking about is that they're supposed to be separated entities, right? And they shouldn't be tied together in that way. And they were fighting against it. And so why was the Board of Supervisors trying to get everyone under the same network?
Right.
I can't help but feel like this is somehow tied into that.
And, it very well could be, Steve, because now that I think about it, it's interesting. Think about what's going on right now with Justin Heap and the fact that they have been fighting to control his IT.
Right.
So Royce Flora said that they tried to take over the IT of the Treasury Department. We talked to Sheriff Joe Arpaio, where the Board of Supervisors were trying to take over the IT for the Sheriff's Department.
Right.
So when you take all of this critical data all across a county, a state, and you consolidate it and put it under the Albert sensor.
Right. Well, then your entire state or county is vulnerable. And maybe, that's what some people want. So.
Yeah, very good point.
Some potential third party subcontractor, like it said in there, has access to all this data, which is supposed to be secure county data.
Well, because it contains a lot of, publicly protected information, right? That you're not supposed to leak. And can you imagine? Imagine being a criminal defense attorney representing your client, and third parties have access to a lot of data that you yourself might not have access to, that could then be shared with potentially your opposition in the county attorney's office or the county attorney's office, and there are a whole host of problems when we associate all of these. Is our Maricopa County Superior Court system, are they sort of consolidated in this so that one
Right.
person would have access, to what the judiciary is talking about, to what the sheriff's department is talking about, to what the county attorneys are talking about, and what the county public defenders are talking about, right? You shouldn't have all of this consolidation because it potentially taints justice, and it potentially, gives people access to critical personal information that should have access to.
Right. It's a whole nother
Yeah.
concern that we have to look
Yeah.
into. I mean, the left likes to talk about the Russians sitting at home in their underwear hacking
Right.
our election system, but really, is that even necessary? Do we even need foreign actors to intrude into our election when we have domestic?
Left-wing partisan organizations who basically have bought their way into our election systems through. We talked about one of the organizations the other day, didn't we? That National Voter Registration Agents organization. It was created. The guy worked for Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
And after the Obama administration, he sort of goes out and does a lot of international work vis-a-vis the State Department. Then he starts this organization to monitor the voter registration databases,
Right.
to make sure, there aren't excessive numbers of changes. We were following this. Well, they didn't do anything about 2022, did they, when we had a significant number of voter registrations changed? So you have all these left-wing organizations that have buried themselves into our elections department through a very partisan DOJ, National Security Agency, and other institutions of the federal government, and their leftist friends like Adrian Fontes at the state level in Arizona.
Yep.
But you want to get the Russians out of our elections? Let's just go back to precinct level voting on paper ballots, and at the end of the night, the people working the precinct will count those ballots and radio their numbers into the central facility, which can then add them all up and give us the results. And then Russians, in order to influence the outcome of our elections, would have to take over all of our speech, which isn't going to be possible, right? Or they would all have to come over here and fake
Count
register
ballots.
vote.
They would have
Come over here and count the ballots, right?
Could you imagine showing up to your
Right.
precinct to cast your ballot
Bunch of
and
Russians
everybody's speaking
working-
Russian in the
Right.
back room?
Right. Yeah,
I think that would be obvious. We'd catch that one, don't you
We'd
think,
probably
Brian? I think
we'd probably catch
we'd
something like that. But that's the best way to get any interference out of your elections, whether it be from a foreign actor or whether it be from a partisan domestic organization that has a stake in the outcome of the election.
Absolutely.
And so you want to. Most of the world does it that way for that very reason, right?
Right.
Because it's really hard to manipulate the end results of your election. And the only way you can do it is through controlling speech otherwise, which the federal government made a big push to do, along with these same non-governmental organizations.
Yes, they did.
So, yeah.
Well, enjoy your week. And if you find any other information or have relevant information on the Albert sensor, how it's used in your state, in your county, in the different agencies, please contact us at wethepeopleaz@protonmail.com. Again, that's wethepeopleaz@protonmail.com. Or Brian, can they reach you at what email can they reach you at?
Brian, Bryan, at blemlawaz.com.
So reach out to us if you have relevant information, because I think the people deserve to know who's poking around in the back room of our elections.
Right.
So
Let's make things visible, folks. Transparency. Yeah.
absolutely.
And with that, Peace.
Peace.